Zureta blog and YouTube channel with Arnaud for the second part of the Azure Terraform Cloud Adoption Framework overview. And now let's go a little bit deeper for the developers, what you have for the developers on a daily basis for them to work with this new Cloud Adoption Framework. Arnaud, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me here. So the second part, yeah, let's go a little bit more into the developer view of all of that. And I want to get started again from the GitHub, and then we switch to Visual Studio Code. So if you look at the repo, you probably see that we have here get started section, which is basically, okay, let's get started fast. So what do we need to have on our laptop to get started with that? You probably see that is a bit weird because I don't mention Terraform at any point into the prerequisites, right? And actually, yes. So what we're doing is we are using VS Code, Docker Desktop, and Git to get the development environment. And out of the development environment, we're coming with a Docker container that is actually called what we call the Rover, and which is actually our DevOps tool chain or key chain, the way you want to call it. And that actually comes with the execution environment, and the development environment is provided by VS Code as part of it. So you see that first thing is you need to choose the right component. If you're on Mac or Windows, Mac you use a Brew, Windows you still use Chocolatey, soon you might use a Winget, but for now still Chocolatey on my blog. And on the first step is very simple. You clone the repository and then you open it into Visual Studio Code, and then you see you have your development environment ready. So rather than talking about this, let's just switch to VS Code where I already cloned the environment.
Right.
Okay, so now let's go here inside my VS Code. I'm gonna share the screen, and here we go. I have a little bit of things to cut here, but that's okay. Okay.
Nothing better than showing the code. Yep, it's coming probably
Exactly.
now. Yep, there you go.
Okay, so now you see I'm deploying a bunch of modules here. I will just pick onto one of that some folder. So I cloned locally those guys into probably something called demo. So CAF Terraform Landing Zone, that looks legit. So if I go there, then that's basically the code we have cloned from our Git repository. Let me open the workspace.
If you can increase a little bit the font as well.
A little bit zooming. All right, that's totally legit. Okay. Is it
There you go.
good? All right.
Yep.
So now I'm looking, it seems to be a little bit outdated. So I will just refresh the content. And yes, actually, it was a bit outdated. Okay, so now you see that it's actually a bit of a weird stuff that we're using here. If you haven't seen that before, we are actually happening to be inside Visual Studio Code. And we're leveraging something called the dev containers. And the dev containers allow you to very transparently connect to your local files on your laptop and project them into a container, into the Docker container, into the Docker Rover that we're using, which is the container with all our Terraform tools. So here you see the internals of it. You see that my dev container.json is actually, we come and automatically provide with a set of extensions. And that's the front end that we give. And here we see, okay, this dev container actually is going to use this Docker compose file. So here you see that I'm actually going to download this Rover container from this as a TF mode Rover from the Docker Hub. and automatically that will compose my dev environment. And you see that here I'm locally on my laptop, and if I even type Terraform, I don't even have it, right?
Yep.
But now you see I'm going to reopen that in container. So now actually without changing my development environment, I'm going to be inside the Rover container.
You have to have Docker desktop installed.
Yep.
As well.
Yep. So if you see here now, it shows starting with dev container. And now what's happening is actually we're doing the Docker pull from the Docker hub, and we're getting the Rover. And once I have that, I'm ready to go. So you see everything is versioned. Remember my emphasis previously on versioning. This is one of the most important aspects of infrastructure as code. I think probably much more importantly than any regular code for infrastructure as code, the versioning is really, really fundamental. So the Rover is in this version 2005 15.10 at the time of recording, and you see we're downloading it right now, and the container is going to be created out of that. So while it's doing that, can talk a little bit about that. That's really a very important aspect. Sometimes when you start talking about developing with Docker, it's really annoying, you know, to get inside the container, then make the difference between your container and your local machine. So at the same time, we were feeling this need of getting a container because we want to have the same experience where we're using on Mac, Linux, and Windows. That's really important for a team of developers. That's really a challenge to get the right tool set on all of those guys. But really, this feature of VS Code is really super cool because that allows you to super transparently work on your code, work on your environment, commit the code totally transparently.
And I would say, Arno, that all dependencies will be inside the container.
Yes.
Then you don't depend on keeping updating your local computer, just pretty much.
Exactly, because you know it's easy to get those components on your laptop, but how in a team everyone make sure everyone is having the same tools. That's also quite a challenge.
Yep.
And to be honest, this is one part of the story, but this is not even the biggest part of the story. If you look at really the difficulties that we're having when we're doing DevOps with all of this, is how do you make sure when your Terraform code is running, first that is running with all of the dependency on the right CI. So let's say, for example, today I want to do GitHub. Fine, then I need to look at the specifics of GitHub to configure with the right version of Terraform, the right version of TF-Lint, the right version of everything. Then the next day, I want to do, let's say I'm on a bad day, I want to do GitLabs. That happens. How do I do that? I want to do Jenkins, I want to do Azure DevOps. Then I need to relearn and redo the things from scratch all the time. Then you guessed it. When we use the Rover, we actually don't care that much about which is the runtime, because you have the Rover and you just ask the CI, hey, run this Rover here, and then all the things around it with just basically launching the Rover and making it run under the testing environment. So that really simplifies the whole DevOps part from the inner feedback loop on my laptop, like I'm doing right now, and to the CI.
And that Rover Docker image that we're downloading here at the moment, they pretty much including like scripts, like a tooling that's going to be required to work with the Terraform and the landing zones, and it's like a different approach to do it. Can you explain in the meantime how that Rover works?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, if you want to see, so same thing as the other ones, Rover is open source code available on GitHub. So basically, you can modify the Rover with the right version of the components that you want. But ultimately, Rover is going to be your interface to landing zone and your abstraction layer with sometimes the mechanisms of Terraform. So if you think about it, when you start doing Terraform, first thing you need to do is manage the state. And of course, managing the state locally is not really managing the state. Okay, so what we provide you with is also this capability of out of the box work on a shared state. So of course, we use Azure Storage Account to do that. And automatically, when you use Rover, then Rover will use your credentials to locate the storage account and connect you back to your storage account. So I'm roaming from my Mac to my PC or to another machine. Based on my credential, actually the rover is going to locate my state. And when I do a rover plan, apply, or destroy, is going to connect me to the state. So all the complex command of linking me to my state, it's done automatically. And what we call that, so those layers of linking between your environment and the storage technology for the backend is things that are done by Rover and is done by a blueprint or by what we call the Launchpad. And we have a set of Launchpad that are made to be used individually, or some of them are made to be used in group like Azure DevOps. And we are working with Hashicorp right now to have a version that we use, and Rover is actually connecting you to Terraform Cloud or Terraform Enterprise. That's also very important for us, is the possibility to leverage backend technology as we want and offering maximum options to customers.
That's great.
So here we go. Now you see that I have my dev container and I have my my bash environment. So right now I am inside the container. So now if I do Terraform version, for instance, now you see that first, well, I have Terraform. That's a good
That's
news.
good.
It's inside my running environment, and it might not be the latest. Now we're in 12.26, but that's the latest, which is validated and version. You know what really we want with infrastructure as code is stability and innovation. So stability works with versionized component, and that's totally okay if you want to work on new version. If I want to work on new version of the Rover, for instance, I can go there and I can say I want to have Rover dev, and I can change to vnext. And then I rebuild my container, and then I have the latest version of the Rover with the latest version of the component. But for now, let's say
That's
I'm
good.
just I'm just discovering it, so I just want to use what's validated, stay
Yep.
into the tested path, right?
That's great. Yeah.
So I was mentioning before, first command you need to do when you don't know what to do is you do Rover. So Rover is your way to interact with your environment. It's gonna check if you're logged in or not. Here you see I have been logged in previously, but it says that hey, you need to initialize a Launchpad with the command. So a Launchpad, that's what I was mentioning before, is this thing to share the state and store the state on my Azure subscription. So here I can create this first command and I do apply, and it will apply the Launchpad into my environment. And this one, the light, again, you can go on GitHub and see which Launchpad you want to use, but the light one is just a storage account that is used and that I'm connecting automatically. So it works on the simplest, smallest subscription. That's working everywhere. You don't need to have any privilege on the Azure AD. That's just really the bare minimum you need to do Terraform in an Azure environment with a shared state. So here it's asking me, it's asking me for the location where I want to put my my state. Or here I'm going to put it into Southeast Asia, Singapore, so that it's not too far from me. But of course, you can deploy then the resources anywhere you want it. It's not limiting you in any regions for the deployment, right?
Yep.
So it's going to take a little while. That's infrastructure as code. It takes some time. It takes a bit of time to be executed. But really, once I have that completed, I have my storage account. I can then run higher level landing zone. So remember, we were talking about CAF foundations previously. And here you see, okay, I want to have Southeast Asia, CAF random, meaning I use the CAF standard, but I add at the end some random characters so that I don't have a conflict with the naming of other people using the out-of-the-box script. And then you have an additional set of landing zone. So I want to emphasize something very briefly, but here what we're using is a hierarchy of landing zones. So meaning that you have to have the open source a Launchpad or a Launchpad applied, and then on top of that you would apply the foundations, and on top of the foundations you would apply the hub and spoke, for instance, or the secure VNet DMZ, etc., etc. So we have 5 layers of stacking like that. So you can manage complexity and you can decouple one landing zone from the other. Meaning that, you know, when I do foundation, I want to configure the basics of accounting on a subscription. And when I want to do hub and spoke, I just want to do the network. And automatically, when I'm going to do the network and I'm going to manage my IP subnet, my features with Azure Firewall, etc., then automatically I will rely on CAF Foundation. And it means that my firewall that is going to be deployed is going to be automatically leveraging my storage account, my log analytics inside the environment. So it's not like, I would say, academic scripting or deployment of components is something that are embedding some kind of real world realities that we want to enforce, right?
Yeah. And I noticed that using Workspace to separate those things, yeah, like the state of each landing zone. Can you explain that quickly? Or
Yeah, absolutely. So we have this this concept of landing zone using Workspace. So we can park a set of things running for what we call the level 0, which is the core of the set of subscription and set of environment. And then you can define a workspace, which is, for instance, Sandpit, UAT, prod, and then that will group together all the states that are related to this deployment. So you can do a stacking of CAF Foundation with a set of states that are related to UAT, another for prod, another for dev. That's how you can compose complexity and multiple environments running inside the same subscriptions. I think there's something that's worth mentioning is sometimes when we hear about landing zone, we hear about deploying the auditing, accounting, and very basic thing on a subscription. I think you start to sense here something that we're trying to get a little bit beyond that, because it's not just about that. It's all about deploying the network with this DevOps concept. It's about deploying ultimately everything. So we have this concept of landing zones that are related. They're not public yet, but we're going to work on publishing it in the next few weeks. But let's say, for instance, deploying a full landing zone to deploy an application. Deploying an application, what it can mean? It means, for instance, you're deploying an app service environment in multiple zones, an Azure application gateway. You are deploying the certificate inside a key vault, and you know automatically you're changing your application. Automatically, you're having the different app service environment updated. The certificate being pulled automatically from Key Vault and stored in Key Vault for App Gateway to use it, and then App Gateway's backend path modified automatically with the app service. That's the kind of landing zone that you can do, and it's way beyond just the foundations.
that's great. And the first thing they have to do when they open like one landing zone is go on the TF files to customize if they want to change these. I mean,
Yep, exactly. You're right. So you see, what we done is the auto TFR. That's really the simple experience for you to change a landing zone, customize a landing zone, play a landing zone. It's really important to get a fast feedback loop, and being able to iterate. Of course, when you're doing a real world deployment, maybe you don't use the TFRs. Very likely you won't use the TFR. You would have, for instance, slash environment that you will have slash integration, slash production, slash UAT, and this is where you put your variable files. But here, we let you do that in the real world. What we want is first you having this good experience and this experimentation, hands-on experience fast using the auto TFRs.
that's great. They can see that as like a template, like a demo, but they can just duplicate that and customize the way that they want, and make sure when they call Terraform apply, they pass this new file as a variable file. if they want to make that. And how that works with the Rover, with the automation, with the Launchpad, if they change, the TF files, or if they create another variable file, how that really works with the Rover.
Yeah, so basically the rover by default is picking the files locally. So the auto TFR, that's the default behavior from the the Terraform environment.
Yep.
But of course, when you're running that inside the enterprise environment, then you're really going to run the rover slash something, and this slash something would be your var file, and then you specify the path from the var file. So
Yep.
maybe here it's good to show a little bit and of the pipelines delivery, and you see what we're showing here. It's the inner feedback loop, right? It's me coding on my laptop and VS Code interacting with my subscription. But just to give you an overview, but ultimately, when we're going with pipelines, and here I put Azure DevOps for this illustration, but it's the same exact thing on GitHub. Basically, it's GitHub running a Rover or Azure DevOps running Rover, and then Rover takes parameter. So it would be Rover, just like we do here, Rover apply. It would be here, it would be Rover TF, landing zone, etc. So you'll say apply, and then you specify var file, and then you specify the path to your var, right? So here that would be the same. You will run the rover inside your CI/CD environment. It's gonna take the logic on the GitHub. It's gonna take the config file on maybe the same GitHub, more likely in another GitHub, and ultimately then that's how you deploy the environment, by using the rover. Same thing on your laptop, same thing in the CI/CD pipeline. And you can check in GitHub environment. This is how we do our integration test. We just pick the variables from the demo environment, and then every time there's a pull request or we make a new version, then it's tested individually inside the GitHub actions.
That's great. That shows flexibility. They can work with multiple repos if they want, and they can mix on the pipeline. And if you're using Terraform Cloud or Enterprise, I think we work on that. Maybe watch another video soon that we're going to explain better how to work with Terraform Enterprise and Cloud.
Absolutely, working with Terraform at the very with Hashicorp at the very moment. So yep, definitely.
That's great. I think that's a good, very good introduction for a developer to start, playing and using the landing zones. And I'm pretty sure that's going to grow, and we're counting with everyone to help from the community and to, get on board on this project. And how long you work on this already? I know.
Well, this is an initiative we started probably a little bit more than 1 year ago, but it's not like, of course, a full-time stuff. It's something we're developing and maturing on site of customer engagement, and we're seeing really the acceleration in the next few weeks. So super happy to get more people following, contributing, opening issues, opening PR, whichever level of contribution you're comfortable with. We're super happy to get it.
That's great. I can see a lot of people here in Australia already, working and trying to help, myself included. And
nice.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks a lot again. And hopefully
Thank you
can
very
record
much.
something soon.
Looking forward to that. Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.